Welcome to the deep dive, where your curiosity fuels our exploration. You send us sources, and we pull out the key insights.
To get you up to speed fast.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into a really foundational work on clear communication. It's Rudolf Flesch's The Art of Readable Writing.
Which also came out as The Art of Plain Talk.
That's the one, dedicated to Anne and Hugo. And it's got those readability charts, the nomographs, tucked away at the end. We won't dive deep into those today, but they're there.
Right. And for you, listening in as the learner, this is, well, it's a great shortcut, a way to really get a handle on writing clearly, effectively, even with complex stuff.
Yeah, we're going to unpack Flesch's core ideas, his principles of plain talk, drawing from various chapters, some surprising examples in there, too.
Definitely. Should we kick things off with his connection to the classics?
Yeah, let's do that. So he starts with this chapter, You and Aristotle, and he makes this really interesting point. He basically argues that, how we teach English writing today, it still echoes classical Greek and Latin grammar.
Right. Composition, rhetoric, all tracing back to Aristotle, essentially.
But Flesch wasn't just saying, oh, look, history. He had a goal.
Absolutely. His aim was to create what he called a modern scientific rhetoric. Something for now.
Okay, so what does that mean practically?
Well, it meant shifting the focus,
Oh.
moving towards understanding the reader, and figuring out the psychological effects of different writing styles.
So less about just following old rules.
And more about the impact on the person reading. He really pushed for needing exact information about language and actual scientific data on how different styles affect people.
Making informed choices, basically.
Precisely. Not just guessing.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And it leads us pretty neatly, actually, into his next point about other people's minds, knowing your audience.
Yeah, this is crucial.
Yeah.
And his examples here really, they really hit home how easy it is to get it wrong.
Like the Berchtesgaden one?
Exactly. Assuming back in 1945 that every American just knew what Berchtesgaden was, or how people understand something like Magna Carta very differently.
We overestimate what readers know.
Constantly. But it's not just knowledge, is it? It's also about interest.
Right. He talks about younger readers wanting maybe romance or adventure, while older readers might lean towards more practical, down-to-earth stuff.
Yeah, and he backs this up with that experiment, the one with the coat description.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, they showed different versions to different groups. Women apparently liked a more detailed version. But an editor at a men's magazine, he went for the much shorter, punchier style.
Really shows how vital it is to tailor it.
Absolutely. You have to know who you're writing for.
It seems obvious, but maybe it's not always easy to do in practice. Okay, so next up is a chapter title that might make you pause, The Importance of Being Trivial.
Yeah. It sounds odd, doesn't it? But what Flesch does here is sort of redefine trivial. He argues that those seemingly minor details, the specific facts, little anecdotes, they're actually, well, essential. They make writing engaging, memorable.
Okay, like that story about the research report.
Where the librarian finds the crucial bit of info in 2 minutes that the researchers missed.
Wow. Shows that nothing's too small.
Exactly. And he gives other examples, too, like the expert testimony out of court needing those precise medical details, or that little story about the rubbers at the Hunter College Elementary School.
The rubbers?
Yeah, like galoshes. A tiny, relatable detail, but it brings the scene to life. And, of course, the reporters covering the Johnstown flood.
Stanley Frank and Paul Sam.
Right. Their specific factual details painted such a vivid picture. That's the power of the trivial.
So it's about using specifics strategically, not just randomly.
Precisely. To connect with the reader.
Got it. Okay, let's shift gears to structure. The shape of ideas. How do we shape things for clarity?
This is really about conciseness and focus. Flesch is a big advocate for shorter sentences.
One main idea per sentence.
Yes. He quotes the historian Alan Nevins. The rule here is the shorter the better.
Simple as that.
Well, yeah. And he shows it works. Think about that Chesapeake and Ohio Railway ad.
Oh, the hog one. A hog can cross the country without changing trains, but you can't.
Exactly. Instantly grabs you, focuses on one clear, relatable comparison.
Very effective.
And he looks at that editorial on Modern Man is Obsolete, too. Shows how a direct style makes even big ideas accessible. It's about perspective, he says. Write as if you're talking to one typical person from your audience.
Right. Focus on that individual reader. Okay, now here's one that might surprise people. All writing is creative.
Yeah, this is interesting. Flesch argues that, it's not just novelists or poets who are creative.
So even if I'm just writing a report.
Even then, He says creativity comes in how we combine existing ideas, how we put things together in new, meaningful ways. It involves both conscious thought and sometimes unconscious processes.
Like those aha moments he describes.
Exactly. Those sudden insights writers and scientists get. It reframes the whole act of writing, even informational writing.
It's about finding the new connection or angle.
Right. There's always an element of, well, invention in how we present things.
Okay, from inspiration to perspiration, maybe? Let's talk about actually starting. From false starts to wrong conclusions. How do we begin effectively?
Well, one key piece of advice is to ditch the old inverted pyramid.
The journalism thing. Most important stuff first.
Yeah. Flesch argues that can often be, well, dull. It doesn't necessarily grab the reader.
So what's the alternative?
Start where the reader will be immediately hooked. Find that point of engagement. He mentions Jack Woodford's ideas and tells that story about Mr. and Mrs. Jethro Whitcomb.
As examples of strong openings.
Exactly. You need a compelling hook to pull the reader in right away. Make them want to read on.
Not just dump facts on them.
Right. You risk losing them before you even get going.
Makes sense. So once we've hooked them, how do we keep them engaged, especially with factual stuff? That brings us to how to be human, though factual.
This is all about relatability. Flesch really stresses that readers need to connect with the subject matter, even if it's, data or policy.
He uses that funny anecdote, doesn't he, about the Frenchman's shoes.
Huh, yeah. And the tariff petition? Examples showing how you can inject life into potentially dry topics using relatable details or stories.
Find the human angle.
That's it. Weave in human stories, human perspectives. Make the facts matter on a personal level.
Connect with the reader's experience.
Exactly.
And speaking of stories, that leads nicely into drama in everyday prose, using dialogue.
Yes, even in nonfiction. Flesch makes a really strong case that good dialogue makes writing more dynamic, more revealing.
It's not just for novels.
Not at all. He pulls examples from an insurance agent's conversation, a soil conservation service pamphlet, even a tax court case.
Wow, a tax court case.
Yeah. To show how dialogue can make the information clearer and more engaging. It lets you show rather than just tell.
So it's more than just quoting people, it's using their words strategically.
Right, to advance the point, reveal character, add energy. It brings it alive.
Okay, this next one sounds interesting. An ear for writing. What's that about?
It's about the sound, the rhythm of your writing. Flesch really encourages using spoken English patterns.
Like using contractions.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of contractions like don't but it's also about listening to the flow, the emphasis in your sentences. Does it sound natural?
He uses General Eisenhower's press conference as an example, right?
To show how a more conversational tone, when done well, can actually improve clarity and impact. It sounds more authentic.
But he's not saying just write exactly like you talk with all the ums and ahs.
No, it's a balance. It's about capturing the rhythm and naturalness of speech while still being clear and, grammatically sound for written text, right for the ear as well as the eye.
Got it. Now, this next chapter might ruffle some feathers. Did Shakespeare make mistakes in English? Questioning grammar rules.
Well, yes, Flesch challenges the idea that grammar rules are set in stone, unchanging forever.
Because language evolves.
Exactly. He points out things in Shakespeare that we might consider mistakes today. His point is that language is alive, it changes.
Like the whole debate about split infinitives.
That's a classic example he brings up. And other things, too. It's really a call for a more flexible approach. Focus on clear communication, not just blindly following every single rule, especially outdated one.
Judge by effectiveness, not just by the rule book.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, then he looks at some trends over time. Our shrinking sentences and our expanding words.
Yeah, this is pretty interesting. He definitely observes that sentences, on average, have gotten shorter in modern writing.
He compares it to older writing, like that Sherman Civil War quote.
Right, which has these really long, complex sentences compared to what we typically see now.
But at the same time, words themselves can change, expanding words.
Yes. While sentences shrink, individual words can actually take on broader meanings or new connotations. He uses the King James Bible versus a modern translation as an example.
Same word, different weight or scope over time.
Precisely. It just shows how dynamic language is on multiple levels.
Okay, let's get to the real nuts and bolts. R for readability. This feels like the core practical advice.
It really is. This is where he lays out how to actively make your writing easier to read. Know your audience, obviously, that's number one.
And use simpler words. Shorter sentences.
Yes, simpler words were appropriate, simpler sentence structures. He specifically warns against empty words, words that don't add much meaning, and overly heavy prepositions and conjunctions.
Keep it direct.
Very much so. He mentions Thorndike's list of simpler synonyms as a tool, and he's big on using active verbs. Active voice makes writing much more direct, more vigorous.
Passive voice tends to muddy things up.
It often does. So be intentional. Choose words and structure for clarity.
So how do we know if we're actually achieving that clarity? How do we measure it? Degrees of plain talk.
Right. This is where Flesch introduces his famous readability formulas, the reading ease score and the human interest score.
These are actual calculations you can do?
Yeah, based on things like average sentence length and average syllables per word. He even shows analyses of articles from The New Yorker, Life, the AMA Journal.
To show how different styles score differently.
Exactly. It gives you a way to sort of objectively gauge how easy or difficult a piece of text is likely to be for a given audience.
A tool, not a rigid rule, I imagine.
Absolutely. A diagnostic tool to help you see where you might simplify or clarify.
And what are the payoffs for doing this? Results of plain talk. What happens when we write more clearly?
Well, the main benefit is you reach more people. Simple as that. Clear writing widens your audience and, crucially, improves comprehension.
Makes sense. People understand it better.
Right. He uses that example of the graded history texts versus the conventional ones. The simpler versions made the history accessible to far more students.
So plain talk isn't about dumbing down.
Not at all. It's about opening up, making complex ideas understandable to more people, breaking down barriers to knowledge.
That's a powerful outcome. But Flesch also acknowledges it's not always straightforward, right? Those unpredictable words and those unpredictable readers.
Yeah, he brings in a dose of reality here. Language is slippery. He uses that funny hotel Astor menu example.
Where the same word meant different things.
Exactly. Showing how context and individual interpretation are huge factors. What you mean isn't always what the reader understands.
He also mentions that election result in Ottawa.
Mm-hmm. And the reading comprehension test with college students. Both highlight how easily misreadings happen, how unpredictable reader responses can be.
And the point about negative words.
Oh, right. How readers sometimes just skim over or miss negatives like not or un, completely flipping the meaning. It's a reminder that, communication is complex.
Even when you try hard to be clear.
Even then, there's always that layer of interpretation.
Okay, one last quick point he makes. Are words necessary? What's the verdict?
Well, he acknowledges visuals, pictures, charts can help. Of course they can.
Right.
But, he argues, clear explanatory text is usually still essential. You often need words to explain the visual, to provide context, to avoid misinterpretation. He mentions a Mr. Grattan using statistics.
Showing that numbers or charts alone aren't always enough.
Right. Visuals are aids, but words are often needed for precision and complete understanding. You can't just rely on pictures to do all the work.
Find the right balance.
Exactly.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive into Rudolf Flesch, what are the big takeaways for you, the learner?
I think it really boils down to a few key things. First, deeply understand your audience. Second, choose clarity, simpler words, shorter sentences, active voice. Third, use specific concrete details to make it engaging. And fourth, remember language changes focus on communication, not just rigid rules.
And applying these gives you that shortcut to more effective communication.
Absolutely. It's incredibly powerful, practical advice.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. How might consciously applying these Flesch principles actually change your communication? In your writing? Maybe even how you speak? And what aha moments did you have listening today? Really think about that balance, the push and pull between clarity and complexity in whatever field you're in.
It's definitely worth considering.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.